Welcome back to Pokemon episode summaries. Today, I'll be doing episode 342, X Loud and Clear. The episode begins with Ash and the gang taking a break in a lightly wooded forest, having some lunch. Ash and the gang had even sent out all of their Pokemon, with May sending out her Skitty Beautyfly and Torchic, Ash sending out his Trico, Corphish, Torkoal, Pikachu, and Tailo, and Brock sending out his Lombre, Mudkip, and Fortress. And as all the Pokemon ate with the gang, Ash and Max commented on how good Brock's food was today, and asked for seconds as they held their bowls up, and Brock obliged. Also mentioning that Ash should be getting very excited because they were now very close to Petalburg City. This led May to ask Ash if he had decided which Pokemon he was going to use to battle her father Norman, and suggested that he train with this Pokemon, reminding Ash that the battle against Norman would be very tough for him, but Ash rebutted that his Pokemon were strong enough to battle Norman, and it didn't really matter which Pokemon he chose because they would all do damage against Norman, although Max doubted this. Especially now, as he pointed to Ash and the gang's Pokemon, and Ash saw that they had all keeled over on the ground, sick from eating too much. Shocking Ash as May continues to eat happily, while Max then notices first that Trico wasn't with all the other Pokemon, and Ash noticed this as well, and began to panic, wondering where it went. Suddenly, though, Pikachu recovers from its sickness, and motions up to a nearby tree, where Ash and the gang spot Trico sitting on a high branch, staring into the sky. Upon seeing Trico, Ash and Max were both able to identify that Trico appeared to be thinking of something, and something must have been bugging it, as Trico appeared to be in an unhappy mood, and that was likely why it was sitting by itself, as it didn't want to be with others right now. Regardless of this, Ash climbed up the tree, wanting to cheer Trico up, trying to talk to him by asking what is wrong, but Trico just ignores Ash by turning the other way, leading May to agree with Max and Ash that Trico must have been in a bad mood, making Ash puzzled, as he now didn't know what to do if Trico wouldn't talk to him. Just then, though, Corphish got determined to help out Trico as it rushed over to the tree across the ground, causing a whole bunch of dirt to be kicked up, and it launches itself up the tree with its sheer speed, smashing into Ash by accident and sending him flying, knocking him down onto the ground. As Corphish manages to climb up to the branch just below Trico and tries to cheer him up, seeing that Trico was still looking away. When Corphish does try to happily talk with Trico, Trico does glance at Corphish for a second, but after some time, it stubbornly just turns its head again, trying to ignore Corphish, which angers Corphish. So it tries to get Trico's attention by jumping up the tree to try and get up to Trico's branch, but while doing this, it simply just slipped and tried to catch its balance, but it couldn't, as it fell to the ground right on top of Ash's head, before bouncing off. A weak Ash, obviously tired from the fall, thanked Corphish for at least trying to help, and Corphish, who was also weak from the fall, lifted its claw, which was its form of saying that it was nothing, but it tried its best, wanting to help, but Corphish admitted that it failed. Seeing Ash injured, Pikachu rushes to his side to comfort him, while Max rushes to Ash as well, concerned about Trico's mood, suggesting that it may have been feeling down after losing to Gulpin last episode. Ash tried to assure Max that Trico was likely just in a bad mood, just having a bad day, as he didn't know what else it could possibly be, since if it was a loss, Trico would likely just divert its anger to training with Ash instead of ignoring him, when suddenly Ash was interrupted while he was assuring Max that Trico would feel better eventually, when the gang started to hear something, believing that it was a voice. And soon enough, Brock recognizes the voice as belonging to a Loudred, and this was confirmed when Ash and the gang saw a large amount of debris and dust fly up over the forest, with the source of this being an angry Loudred rampaging through the forest, having emerged from the ground, causing all the dust and debris to fly up. And as soon as all the debris cleared, Ash and the gang could see that the angry Loudred was coming towards them, and eventually it reached their lunch site and smashed Ash and the gang's other Pokemon away, since they were blocking its path as they were knocked out on the ground from eating too much. Loudred also rams into Ash and the gang's backpacks, knocking them around before running down the forest path, with Ash and the gang not even able to do anything to apprehend the Loudred if they wanted to, since Loudred was emitting a very loud sound, causing Ash and the gang to have to be occupied with plugging their ears. As Ash and the gang were doing this, Trico noticed as the Loudred continued to rampage down the road past Trico's tree, and Trico seemed intrigued by the Loudred for some reason. Eventually, Loudred keeps running until it encounters none other than a person whose name was Guy, and it was the Loudred's trainer, who had come to look for it after it ran away. Guy tries to stop his Loudred from rampaging, yelling at it to stop, but when Guy tries to grab a hold of Loudred to forcibly stop him, Loudred just pushes him away and continues onward, leading Guy to chase after Loudred and call out to it down the road, and he eventually manages to reach Loudred by lunging towards him, and he manages to calm Loudred down by jumping on its back, making it snap out of its rampaging state and look extremely calm. To keep Loudred calm, Guy petted it, causing Loudred to smile at him. Ash and the gang had caught up at this point, wanting to go after Loudred, initially for revenge, since, it fucked up their Pokemon in their bags and all that, and they had been able to stop covering their ears, but their want for revenge was soon replaced with a sense of admiration for Guy, since they were impressed with how he was able to calm down Loudred. As for Trico, it was still watching from the nearby tree. Yeah, it could see that far, and it was curious now. Guy apologized for Loudred going all insane, and decided to introduce himself to Ash and the gang, as they all decided to sit down on some nearby logs to chat, as Ash and the gang were curious about Guy and wanted to know more about him. As for Loudred, it was so calm that it managed to fall asleep, doing a classic huge guy snore, where it had a bubble entering and leaving its nose. Ash introduced himself to Guy, along with the rest of the gang. They introduced themselves as well, leaving Guy to introduce himself back before remembering that he had already introduced himself. Brock then asks if Guy was a trainer or just someone who liked to raise a Loudred, with Guy confirming that he was a trainer and that he loved to battle, adding that he was traveling around Hoenn to enter the Hoenn League and had 2 badges, though admitted that he was finding the journey to collect the badges quite difficult. This leads Ash to brag that he was entering the Hoenn League as well, but he had already won 4 badges and was going for his 5th badge, set to challenge the gym leader Norman in Petalburg City, adding that he was very excited to do this, making Guy impressed, and he states his wish that he had that many badges, as opposed to 2. Guy then changes the subject of the conversation, apologizing for the trouble Loudred caused again, explaining that Loudred was his best friend and partner Pokemon, but lately it had been going into random fits of rage, suddenly developing a mind of its own that just took over, and it would just suddenly become a troublemaker that had trouble listening to any of his commands, adding that Loudred was never like this before, only recently. Upon Guy mentioning this, Ash immediately thinks of Trico and looks up at him in the tree, remarking that Pokemon seem to have very confusing personalities at times, assuring Guy that Loudred wasn't the only one that was acting strange lately, stating that Pokemon must have been having troubles much like humans do, so basically sometimes they would just have different moods. Brock agrees with Ash, as does May, who comments that Pokemon having troubles could certainly be annoying for humans, although Max gets annoyed at this, stating that May had no room to complain about Pokemon causing troubles, since she always caused trouble and annoyances all the time, talking about all the annoyances she had caused him while he was traveling with her, telling Guy that his biggest problem in life was traveling with May for such a long time. May gets embarrassed and angry at this, to the point where she goes to hit Max on the head, and goes on and on about how fucking bratty Max was. Although, right before she hits Max, she stops, as she didn't want to get violent with Max, telling him that she'd never hurt her little brother, but begs him to at least watch what he was saying from now on, which makes Brock and Guy laugh, since they found it funny how May wasn't taking wrath on her little brother, and kind of cowering to him when he was a little pipsqueak, and May could easily beat his ass. Guy then jokes that May and Max fought like they were in a Pokemon battle, and upon hearing this, Ash got an idea, as he decided to challenge Guy to a Pokemon battle, though Guy wondered why Ash wanted to battle, leading Ash to explain that he had just realized, after remembering how Trico was cheered up last time it was angry by battling, that if Ash battled Guy in his Loudred, Loudred's temper may calm down after releasing some anger from battling. Guy stated his belief that Loudred's anger would just end up coming back, but Ash believed that if Loudred battled, it would be so tired that it would feel more relaxed, and once it saw how good it felt to be truly relaxed and not hyper, it would likely stay in that state. Guy accepted Ash's challenge, believing what he said, as he and Ash went over to an area on the road that conveniently could act as a pretty good battlefield. Ash and the gang had recalled their Pokemon by this point, but Ash was about to send in one of his Pokemon to battle, obviously, but right before he could choose a Pokemon to battle, Trico had heard that a battle was about to begin, and immediately jumped down from the tree right in front of Ash, insinuating that it wanted to fight the Loudred. Ash realized that this was a great idea, because if Trico calmed down from its anger last time it had a battle, then it should calm down from its anger by having a battle again as well, so Ash officially had Trico as his Pokemon. So once Loudred had woken up, without further ado, Ash and Guy took opposite sides on the battlefield, and Brock stood in the middle, being the referee, declaring the rules for the battle being a one-on-one, as Trico spit its twig out so that it could immensely focus on the battle, and Loudred glared at Trico, determined to win. The battle then began, with Trico smashing into Loudred with a quick attack, although Loudred was mostly unfazed, just being knocked back a few feet, and then used Stomp on Trico, pinning it under its foot. But Trico breaks free, as Loudred was forced to step off of Trico once Trico used Bullet Seed. Loudred almost gets knocked over, but it then knocks Trico back with a supersonic attack, but Trico managed to shake the attack off, leading Loudred to instead use an Earthquake as it jumps into the air and smashes down onto the earth, causing the Earthquake to go right towards Trico. But Ash has Trico dodge by jumping away, and then he has it pound Loudred extremely hard. This pound was so powerful that Loudred rolls back and smashes into a nearby tree, leading Ash to think that he had won, as he has Trico step up to Loudred to deal a finishing attack. However, Loudred just barely manages to get up and angrily glares at Trico, and Trico angrily glares at it back, signifying that there was a very strong rivalry between the two, when suddenly both of them began to glow, making Ash, Guy, and the rest of the gang extremely shocked at this, because they knew that the glowing meant that Trico and Loudred were both evolving, and not only were they shocked at their evolution, but they were shocked at the fact that they happened to be evolving at the exact same time. But sure enough, Trico stopped glowing first, and appeared in his secondary stage, Grovyle, and Loudred then stopped glowing and appeared in his third form, Exploud. Ash now had a Grovyle, and Guy now had an Exploud. Ash and Guy were extremely excited upon having new evolutions, and Max was particularly excited by Exploud due to how large it was, and asked May to scan it with her Pokedex. May wanted to as well, so she did, and learned some shit about it, while Ash scanned his Grovyle with his Pokedex to find out that it had a signature move that it didn't know as a Trico, being Leaf Blade. Just then, Grovyle uses Leaf Blade, without even being ordered by Ash, to slash a new twig from a nearby tree, and it catches the twig in midair and places it in its mouth, leaving Ash and Max shocked at how much power the Leaf Blade had, because the twig in Grovyle's mouth came from an entire branch. Grovyle had just effortlessly chopped off a branch. With both Pokemon having evolved, Brock quickly jumped in between the two and signaled that it was time for the match to restart, and advised Ash and Guy to get used to their new Pokemon and prepare for battle. And they did, with the battle resuming with Ash striking first, having Grovyle use Leaf Blade, although Guy orders his X-Cloud to dodge, and then strike back with a stomp. But, much to Guy's surprise, X-Cloud doesn't listen to him at all, as it just glares at Grovyle. And then it begins to suck in air, and once it had enough, it released it as its newly learned attack that it had learned upon evolving, Hyper Voice. So it did attack, but it wasn't listening to Guy whatsoever, making Max, May, and Pikachu shocked as they watched seeing Grovyle get absolutely thrown back thanks to the Hyper Voice. Grovyle was definitely hurt, but it was angry at X-Cloud now, and angrily glared at it, preparing to attack it. But before it could do this, suddenly, X-Cloud started to rampage around the battlefield, becoming super angry once again. And it gets to the point where it leaves its spot on the battlefield, and Ash and the gang simply hide away, trying to not be affected by X-Cloud, as Guy hides with them as well, as X-Cloud blows another Hyper Voice straight into a tree, knocking it down. Guy commands X-Cloud to stop, but it wouldn't listen, and begins to throw rocks and destroy numerous trees. Ash then tells Grovyle to try and stop X-Cloud's rampage by hitting it with a Bullet Seed, and Grovyle does so, although the Bullet Seed does nothing but make X-Cloud more angry, not doing any damage at all, as X-Cloud retaliates with an Earthquake, which causes everyone to shake and fall on the ground. Although Ash told Grovyle to stand up and chase after the X-Cloud, as X-Cloud was now taking off down the road, threatening to destroy other parts of the wilderness away from the area. Grovyle obliged, getting up and catching up to X-Cloud, and it then used a quick attack, but X-Cloud smashed away Grovyle to the ground before it could get the quick attack off. Ash and the gang catch up with Grovyle, but they see that it was knocked down, so all Ash and the gang could do was call for X-Cloud, as it was already trudging off down the road, disappearing into the distance, heading towards yet another forest. Although Guy immediately ran after his X-Cloud and begged Ash and the gang to help him chase after it, and Ash and the gang nodded, agreeing, as they chased after Guy, who was chasing after X-Cloud. Grovyle then got up and went off to find X-Cloud as well, wanting to get revenge. Meanwhile, Team Rocket were sitting near the edge of a cliff on some stumps in the forest, and were starving and exhausted, pitying themselves on how they had lost to Ash and the gang last episode, and had failed to get any of the food from the storage room last episode either. Also complaining about how they haven't had any food, period, nor much sleep either, since they couldn't sleep, since they were so hungry. Meowth out of nowhere then blames Jessie for Team Rocket not getting away with the food last time, and this makes Jessie angry, and she just ended up going completely insane due to being angry and hungry at the same time, and she said that she couldn't take it anymore, and goes off to look for something to eat, determined to find something, but she finds herself at the edge of the cliff, and manages to catch herself just before falling off. When she looks down, she sees a small lake with a waterfall below. She tries to bend down, debating if she should climb down the cliff to get to the waterfall, since she wanted some of that fresh water, hoping that that would quell some of her hunger somehow. When suddenly, Meowth and James approached, concerned that Jessie might walk off the cliff, and it was then that all the three Team Rocket members noticed something drinking the water from the waterfall. James wondered what it was, although Meowth knew what it was: an X-Cloud, the evolved form of Loudred. Unbeknownst to Team Rocket, this was Guy's X-Cloud, although they wouldn't be concerned about this at all, because what they were concerned about was knowing that X-Cloud was the evolved form of Loudred, because upon hearing this, they remembered all the many hard times that they had with Loudred back in Dewford, and they remembered every single one. Like, remember when they got trampled in the cave and all that shit by that one wild Loudred? Yeah, they were basically scarred from that. Jessie and James were so scarred that they began to run away as far as possible from the cliff with the X-Cloud at the bottom, stating their belief that X-Cloud was too dangerous, so they weren't going to bother catching it. They couldn't care less. Although Meowth obviously wasn't as scarred as Jessie and James, as he stopped them from going away, blocking their path, and tried to explain to Jessie and James that catching X-Cloud would be worth it because it would be a very great present for Giovanni. Jessie and James wondered how, leading Meowth to explain that Giovanni could use it as a very good alarm clock every morning. And not only could he use it to get out of bed every morning, but he could use it to set reminders for whenever he had to do something at an exact time. And Meowth knew that Giovanni would love to have his time being organized so well, and he would love to have a reminder. And Meowth also stated that he could use Loudred to scare all of the Team Rocket grunts to make them do whatever the fuck he said if they refused because their mission was too dangerous. Meowth has a boss fantasy of this, and Jessie and James have the same fantasy, and they all hope that they would get promoted, with Meowth stating that it was very likely that they would get promoted, as he lays down, mimicking Giovanni sleeping and being woken up by X-Cloud, as he gets up and jumps up, cheering for a promotion, along with Jessie and James, who decided that they were going to help Meowth capture X-Cloud now. And Wobbuffet agreed as well, forcibly popping out of its Pokeball. Meanwhile, Ash and the gang were searching for X-Cloud, with the help of Grovyle, as well as Guy, obviously, looking throughout the entire forest and calling for X-Cloud's name, but they were getting no response and couldn't find him. Guy was just about to give up searching at this point, despite being the one that had led the search party, because he was starting to come to the conclusion that they would never find X-Cloud, since it likely went away, not wanting Guy as a trainer anymore. Although Ash comforted Guy, stating his belief that they would find X-Cloud soon, and reassuring Guy that X-Cloud did want to be his partner, stating that that was only more of a reason why Guy couldn't give up on his X-Cloud, because he couldn't give up on his partner. Guy then noticed that Grovyle was still by Ash, and told Ash that he was lucky to have Pokemon that listened to him. This led Ash to notice Grovyle, having not noticed him before, thinking that he had already recalled it. And Ash came to the conclusion, once he saw that Grovyle looked pretty angry, that it was likely tired and needed rest still, because, he hadn't actually recalled it. So he went to go recall it into his Pokeball, but Ash had mistaken Grovyle being bitchy because it was tired and hurt, for it actually being bitchy because it wanted to find X-Cloud and get revenge. So Grovyle refused to be recalled, and instead jumped into the trees, up high. Ash tries to convince Grovyle to return by holding out Grovyle's Pokeball and asking it if it wanted to take a rest, but Grovyle just refuses and rests itself on a branch like a bird on a perch in the tree and looks out over the forest for Exploud. Upon seeing this, May commented that Grovyle had become even more stubborn upon evolution, and wondered why Grovyle was being so disobedient now, but Max stated that Grovyle wasn't being disobedient because it didn't like Ash, it was only being disobedient this time because it had a rivalry with Exploud, and it really wanted to find it so that it could get revenge. Hey, at least Max had figured it out. Guy then asks Ash and the gang if they knew if a Pokemon's personality was supposed to change after an evolution, and Brock confirmed that this could definitely be the case. Guy then stated that he wished this wasn't the case because he wished that Exploud was more tame, like it was before it evolved. Brock stated that it would just take some battles for Exploud to appreciate Guy again, and Max commented that Exploud would definitely come around to Guy, since it was his starter Pokemon. It had to remember him eventually, and it had to respect him somewhere deep down. Although Max then realized that Guy had mentioned that Exploud used to be a lot calmer, and he hadn't seen this in action, so he asked if this was true, suggesting that maybe Guy must have acquired Exploud back when it was only a Whismur, as Whismur were known to be a lot more calm than Loudred or Exploud, and Guy confirmed this as he looked up in the trees at Grovyle and stated that how calm Grovyle looked reminded him of how calm his Exploud used to be back when it was only a Whismur. And we then see flashbacks of Guy training Whismur, stating that they were very close friends when it was just a Whismur, and Whismur was actually quite cowardly and somewhat quiet, and it would only have occasional outbursts, which Guy could easily control, so they could just relax and sit on benches and do the odd training and shit like that. But then he remembered the day that it evolved into Loudred. Initially, Guy was super happy that his Whismur had evolved, and he began to dance around with Loudred, and he initially liked Loudred's evolution because he could train it better, since Loudred was more courageous and outgoing, so he could do a lot more with it. But he then immediately wished that it would have evolved back into a Whismur, because Loudred became more stubborn as well, and it developed and started having more tantrums, which were much worse than Whismur's, which became too much for him, so he could barely even control his Loudred. Meanwhile, back with Team Rocket, they had descended down the cliff, not waking Exploud, as it slept soundly right by the waterfall, allowing Team Rocket to sneak into some bushes, hiding. And Team Rocket declared that it was now time to put their plan into action, since the Exploud was asleep, and James targeted the Exploud with some corks that were launched out of a Carvana cork launcher, and he eventually shoots a whole barrage of them, and the corks landed in Exploud's ear pipes, and Team Rocket thus cheered loudly, since Exploud's ears were now plugged, so it wouldn't be able to hear them do anything. So Team Rocket declared that Phase 1 was complete, and went onwards with Phase 2, which involved James putting a net over Exploud, capturing it. However, as Team Rocket did a dance in celebration of capturing Exploud, Exploud happened to wake up in shock for no real reason, and it got angry, realizing that it was captured, and managed to pop the corks right out of its ears, and shattered the net in the process, just out of pure anger. And then it roared like mad, unleashing a very strong hyper voice, scaring Team Rocket, although they weren't scared on the ground for long, as the hyper voice was able to send Team Rocket blasting off. However, Exploud's hyper voice was so loud that Grovyle was able to hear it from atop the trees, and jumped down the trees, heading towards the source of the sound, going from branch to branch to branch to go as fast as possible. Ash and the gang and Guy realized that Grovyle was heading towards something it heard, and they soon heard the roar as well, and followed after Grovyle. But Grovyle was in such a hurry to get to Exploud that it charged ahead and made it over to the cliff that overlooked the waterfall first, and it jumped down into the lake below, and it soon spotted Exploud inside the lake by the waterfall, and glared angrily at it. And soon, Exploud, still in a terrible mood, spotted Grovyle as well, and the two of them stared each other down for a long time, until suddenly, even though it was immensely cloudy, the sun then appeared through the clouds, and at this moment, Grovyle thought it was the perfect time for them to resume their battle, even without their trainers, as Grovyle went for the first attack, going as fast as it could, like a rocket, towards Exploud, but Exploud simply moved out of the way, used a stomp on Grovyle before Grovyle could use any attack, although Grovyle just dodged and then used Pound on Exploud, which sent Exploud flying back through the water, although Exploud soon got back up, angry at Grovyle, as it launched a hyper voice at it, with a bit of supersonic added in there as well, but this did no real damage to Grovyle, as it just stood there and took the attack like a champ, although it did begin to get a bit annoyed by the attack, so it jumped away and used Bullet Seed on Exploud. This Bullet Seed hit Exploud so hard and so directly that it fell down to the ground in the water, and it was just then that Ash and the gang and Guy had arrived at the waterfall, and noticed the battle going on, as Guy runs over to his Exploud right as it got up. Guy thought that his Exploud was ready to listen to him, so he and Ash declared that it was time for the real battle to resume, basically writing off the battle that Grovyle and Exploud had just had as an unofficial mess, since there was no actual trainers involved. Anyways, Ash then began the battle by having Grovyle use a Leaf Blade, and Grovyle proceeds to head straight for Exploud with this. And Guy orders Exploud to dodge, but Exploud still doesn't listen and just takes the attack, therefore getting damaged. Grovyle then goes in for a more powerful Leaf Blade this time, spinning while doing it, leading Guy to order Exploud to dodge again, but Exploud once again ignored Guy's command and simply blocks Grovyle's Leaf Blade by catching it, shocking May that Exploud managed to grab the leaf in mid-swipe. With Exploud now having a grasp on Grovyle's leaf, it was having trouble moving, so it tried to wrestle its way out, but X-Cloud wrestled its way back, trying to make sure the Leaf Blade didn't hit it, but then Grovyle was able to break free from X-Cloud by using Pound on it, sending X-Cloud back. Guy gets a bit mad at X-Cloud's failure, stating that if it wanted to win, it would have to follow his orders. Although X-Cloud refuses to listen to him, even as Guy begged him to, which shocked Guy, as X-Cloud just continued onwards, heading towards Grovyle to attack it himself. However, before X-Cloud could attack, we then see Team Rocket, who was watching the fight between X-Cloud and Grovyle from the bushes, and James then pulled out his new cork launcher, this time shaped like a Sharpedo, and revealed his plan to now shoot the corks into X-Cloud like before, but this time, the corks would follow X-Cloud, and basically, Team Rocket would wait for X-Cloud to get rid of the first corks that ended up in its ears, and while it was stopped doing this, James would shoot another batch that would be forced to enter X-Cloud's ears, since they were meant to follow X-Cloud, so it couldn't run away from them. Jessie remarked how she couldn't wait for X-Cloud to cower in fear upon having the corks in it, and also suggested that they use the corks to capture Grovyle and Pikachu as well, by distracting them by plugging their ears. James agreed with this, but declared that they were still going to capture X-Cloud first, so he aimed his Sharpedo cork launcher right at X-Cloud, but it was just then that Guy turned to the bushes and saw the launcher and James aiming it, and jumped in front of X-Cloud to protect it from being hit. And also pushes X-Cloud away from the corks that were launched. Specifically, 5 of them were launched. However, just as James had designed the corks, since they had missed X-Cloud the first time, they simply just went up into the air and turned around, going back to their target, leaving Ash to take action, having Pikachu use Thunderbolt to destroy them as they harmlessly explode in the air. Team Rocket, especially Jessie, get angry that the corks were destroyed, since she thought that they couldn't be used to capture anything anymore, and Team Rocket began to say their motto, although Ash simply told Team Rocket that their motto was old and annoying as fuck by now, which was the most true thing ever, and Ash has Pikachu use Thunderbolt to send Team Rocket blasting off, although X-Cloud, not listening to anyone's commands still, uses a Hyper Voice as well to send Team Rocket extra blasting off. Guy gets up and recovers from the whole situation where he got hit by the 5 corks, and after complaining about how terrible the situation was, he immediately goes up to X-Cloud and makes sure that he at least protected it, asking if he was alright. X-Cloud turned and glared at Guy, making Guy worried that X-Cloud still hated him. Ash and the gang watched in anticipation, thinking that X-Cloud may go in for an attack or some shit on Guy for some reason, but X-Cloud doesn't even move. This made Guy sad, as he put his head down in despair, thinking that his X-Cloud didn't even find him worthy to attack. Although, suddenly, as Guy was on the ground, depressed, he then noticed that X-Cloud had come up to him and offered out his hand. And X-Cloud then smiled, and Guy took X-Cloud's hand, and asked X-Cloud if it now accepted him as its trainer, and had remembered all the good times they had together. And X-Cloud nodded, confirming that it did remember everything that Guy and it had went through back when it was a Whismer, and Guy and X-Cloud shared a very good and very needed hug, with X-Cloud also helping Guy up from the ground. Guy was relieved that his X-Cloud had remembered him, and realized that X-Cloud must have remembered how much Guy cared for it after Guy had saved it from the corpse, and added that X-Cloud must have been grateful to him since Guy saved him, so that was basically what restored their bond. Ash and the gang cheered, happy to see that Guy and X-Cloud had bonded again, as Guy thanked Ash and the gang for their help, and declared that he and X-Cloud were going to start training together again. Hearing this, Ash reminded Guy that they had to still finish the battle between Grovyle and X-Cloud, and stated that that could be the perfect training, and Guy agreed, so the battle resumed once again. Grovyle and X-Cloud start by simply glaring at each other again, but eventually Guy ordered X-Cloud to go in for a tackle, and X-Cloud actually listened to Guy this time, going in for a tackle, but Grovyle went in for a quick attack, leading the 2 Pokemon to clash and end up pressing arm to arm, wrestling. And the episode then ends as we don't get to see who won the battle by the waterfall, but it can be assumed that it was a tie.